Alrighty, friends, welcome back to another edition of LandO's Logic. Yes, this is the very first episode of the CDL 2022 season. We learned a lot at the Kickoff Classic. Despite a lot of teams having a very small sample size, there is a lot of stories coming into our very first major, our Major 1 qualifiers, which are going down this weekend. And I did my best to try and narrow down to me what I believe are the top five most interesting, or at least the 5 that you should be keeping your eye on the most, as I think that could have the biggest impact on this major as a whole. But like I said, Kickoff Classic was amazing. I haven't really had a chance to really talk about it, but I just want to say the event was spectacular. I had a great time commentating it. I felt like the crowd was electric. The matches were incredible. And I think all in all, from looking at every single aspect of how the broadcast went and the feedback of it, to me, I think it was one of the best that we've seen in Call of Duty history, the best one that we've seen in the CDL in terms of kickoff events. And then if you were to compare it to like Totinos and PSX as well, to me, this one sits at the very top of those. So it was a great way to kick off the Vanguard year. And like I said, it gave us a lot of stories, a nice little teaser, if you will, for how the season is going to start off. So excited to talk about this. I will be having my pick'em predictions, my LandO's lock-in series coming out within the next few days. So if you are looking for those, just know that those are right around the corner. I'm going to be uploading LandO's Logic episodes somewhat frequently. We'll see when the topics to me kind of pop off the page. If I feel like it's something that really needs to be discussed, we'll pop on camera and we'll talk about it. And throughout this video as well, like I said, throughout these 5 segments that we're going to be discussing, you can find those descriptions or those timestamps linked in the description as well throughout the scrolling of this video. You can feel free to scroll through and find a particular subject. If you want to watch these out of order, you can feel free to do so because they're already in somewhat of a mixed order as it stands right now. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with our very first one. We're kicking things off with a spicy one as well. Atlanta FaZe. Now, one thing that I've done is I've almost made like a newspaper headline type of question for each of these. And the question that I have for the Atlanta FaZe is signs of things to come, question mark. Or is this loss that they had to the Seattle Surge a sign of things to come here at Major 1, or really just in general throughout the remainder of the season? And I want to make it clear, right? I am not saying by signs of things to come that I expect for Atlanta FaZe to fall in the bottom 8, if you will, right? When I mean signs of things to come, I'm not talking about first round exits in tournaments. I'm not talking about top 6, top 8 placements to be the new norm. That's not at all what I'm talking about, but rather more of a small aspect of their overall game, right? Is this season going to be Cold War Part 2? Or is this going to be more like Modern Warfare? Is it going to be closer to the first year of franchising in 2020, or is it going to be more of a 2021 year where it is just straight up dominance? Nobody's able to hang with this team. They lead in every single category: hardpoint, search and destroy, control, first blood percentage, whatever number you want to throw out there. Is this going to be Cold War Part 2? Is it just a continuation of the dominance that we saw last year, or could it be more similar to what we saw in Modern Warfare, where again, a top team in the game without question? I mean, I feel like top 2 throughout the entirety of the year, but at the same time, they were still losing majors, right? They were dropping in finals. They had a few different second places last year, or times where they didn't make it, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel like this story, this question has just as much to do with the rest of the league than it does with the Atlanta FaZe themselves. So what do I mean by that? I'm basically talking about the way that the rest of the league is starting to develop. I feel like every franchise, for the most part, who's stuck it out since then, is starting to figure things out, or things have finally cemented. They're finally up to speed on what it is, how to handle roster changes, whether it comes to salaries, whether it comes to management, whether it comes to, I mean, just all kinds of different aspects. The first year was a huge learning period. Second year was kind of learning more things about how the CDL works and taking the things that you learned from the first year and still experimenting. So that's something. Also, when we talk about how the league has really beefed up in terms of just every single aspect about it, you're also looking at the way that teams are structuring themselves. I feel like the conversation has gone from, roles and, just different positions on the map to now it's all about the SMG line. I feel like during the offseason, it was like, okay, cool, they have this main AR, this is their flex, but who are the SMGs, right? Who are the SMGs they're going to be running in first? And all of that is because of the Atlanta FaZe. All of that is because of the Tiny Terrors, Simp and Abizi. Those two guys are changing the way that the CDL, that franchises are looking at their own team to say, you know what, maybe these roles in particular, these might be more important than the AR guys in terms of just level of interest or level of focus that you put into these two roles. Maybe it even comes to a factor of, well, you know, we can get this guy as a flex, or this guy actually is a good SMG. Maybe we'll take the SMG guy. And the reason why that is settling in everybody's minds is because of the Tiny Terrors and the Atlanta FaZe. So again, we talked about it. Teams are figuring things out. The way that teams are approaching roles specifically are trying to counter the Atlanta FaZe. And then on top of that, you also look at the franchises who have been kind of bottom of the barrel the last year. And what have they done? Seattle Surge, prime example. The reason why we are even having this conversation in the first place is because of Seattle, a team the last 2 years who has not really even at any point been in the conversation of truly winning a major. We saw them skyrocket in the standings already. I shouldn't say in the standings because it hasn't officially started yet, but they will skyrocket in the standings from where they were the last 2 years. They've already jumped in everyone's power rankings. Same thing for the London Royal Ravens. Granted, didn't have a great kickoff, but this team, much like the Seattle Surge, I want to say, only has upside because they followed the exact same strategy as the Seattle Surge. Next team, LA Guerrillas, right? They obviously didn't go the challenger route, but you have to admit, right? Despite not having a great performance at all at the Kickoff Classic, LAG, they have got some real potential to make noise if this team does pan out the way that we think that it could, right? I mean, they go from players who, you know, from an on-paper standpoint, just did not look like they could hang with the rest of the league, to now picking up some very, very solid pieces that, again, if they can mesh, there was no question that their skills ceiling is going to be high, one of the higher level teams in the entirety of the CDL. The last thing that I will say about the Atlanta FaZe, right? We talked about pretty much the way that the league is approaching things, the way that franchises are upgrading, the SMG line conversation, the bottom four teams. Obviously, 3 of them have made dramatic differences to their roster compositions. And the last thing that I want to say about the Atlanta FaZe is this. And people will take this the wrong way, and that's fine if they do. But to me, the overarching conversation to me about the Atlanta FaZe is, will there be any level of complacency this year? And notice I did not say that they're going to be complacent. What I said was, is there any level of complacency? Will there be any of that this year? Which I feel like is a question, because you have to admit, right? Atlanta FaZe, you couldn't have much better of a year than you did last season. I mean, right? The way that they were able to dominate throughout majors, the record that they had, we already talked about it, but the way that they were able to storm through everybody, and considering the year prior where they lost in the grand finals, they lost in the champs finals versus the Dallas Empire, and honestly kind of got embarrassed versus some veterans in that situation. So they go from that year to 5v5 to 4v4. They adjust their roster. They bring in Arcides because of that very loss. And they come through and they show everybody, you know what? We are the top dog this year. And nobody doubted them, right? I mean, like you would hear interviews of players being like, yeah, you know, we beat this team, but they're not the Atlanta FaZe. You know, they're not the Atlanta FaZe, right? I mean, we didn't lose to, whether we didn't beat the top dogs in the game, we're aware of who the top team is in the game. There was no question about it, who the best team throughout the very beginning and the end of the year, who it was Atlanta FaZe. And so from their perspective, what do you really have to prove? To be honest, I mean, like when you're looking for motivation as a coaching staff, I guarantee this will be a big thing for them this year. You have to find a way to get these guys motivated, because you know what? When you're already at the top of the mountain, when you've already been told that you're the best, what are you striving for? Who are you competing against at the end of the day? And so I think that will be a big talking point for the Atlanta FaZe. And I feel like the one thing that could, or I guess there's 2 things. To me, the 2 things that could drive this team are early losses like they had to the Seattle Surge, the level of competition that we have right now in the CDL for people to bring up and say, you know what, maybe this team isn't as good as they used to be. That could be something that drives them. Another thing as well could be the dynasty conversation. That seems to be kind of an awkward talking point for the broadcast. It seems to be kind of an awkward talking point for the CD, or I shouldn't say the CDL, but the CDL community, right? For the Call of Duty community. Like, where do we rank this team? Like, are they a dynasty? Granted, they did change up their roster a little bit. Like, you know what? This could be their dynasty year. This could be the year where they showcase and say, you know what? We're going to have Cold War Part 2. And so there is no level of doubt of whether or not this team is a dynasty because they won the championship. They've already done that, right? I think that also could be something that fuels this team as well. But I think it will be a really interesting story to see is that Atlanta FaZe is that loss that they had to the Seattle Surge. I know it happened last year at the kickoff versus the Florida Mutineers in that game 5, but this loss, a more dominant loss, an early defeat versus a great team in the Seattle Surge, is this a sign of things to come, not just for the Atlanta FaZe, but for the entirety of the league? A great conversation, and we'll see what Atlanta FaZe can potentially do, right, at the Stage 1 Major. Excited to see what they can do in the qualifiers, and I fully expect them to be a top team, but the level of which they can be a top team could be in question. All right, we had to tiptoe around a lot of things there. Moving on to another big story coming into the Major 1 qualifiers, or just Major 1 in its entirety, is the team that we've been talking about a lot throughout that last segment, Seattle Surge. Do we have another major contender? And when I say major contender, I'm not talking about, oh, can this team win a championship, right? It is this team seriously going to contend all season long, right? And that to me is a very real possibility for this roster. Again, when you look at their level of work at the Kickoff Classic, they come in, they beat London Royal Ravens. They come through in their next match, and they beat the Atlanta FaZe, for God's sake, in a 3-1 fashion. They come back after getting smoked on Bocage. Sib clutches a crazy 1v1 in round 11 versus Arcides off of a great play from Pred. Or rather, no, wait. It was Sid. No, it was Sid the entire time. I apologize. Sib had gotten the early 2 and then clutches the 1v1 versus Arcides. And not only do they beat them in that round 11, they then come into the control where you could argue there should be some questions. And they come through and they 3-0 the Atlanta FaZe, right? And I want to put this in perspective. This is not just a good team at control. Atlanta FaZe, by definition, nobody has had a higher win rate than Atlanta FaZe in Cold War control. They had an 80% win rate. Typically, when a team is at the very top of a particular game mode, it's anywhere from like 55 to at top 60, maybe 62% is where a high range is. And those again are like 3, 2, and 1, somewhere around there. So for them to be at 80%, to me, raises the question, that might be the best that we have seen any team at a game mode in like the last 5 or 6 years. So to keep that in mind, the fact that Seattle was able to come through, granted early in the year, but still, and 3-0 this team. And then not only do they do that, but then they come in to that Tuscan hardpoint, have a very bad first side. They go down 142 to 76. And whenever we see the end of the second set of rotations, the score goes from 142 to 76 to 196 to 248. Seattle Surge went on a 172 to 54 run versus the Atlanta FaZe. Right? I mean, that to me is wild. I think that is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And when you talk about the players who led the way, it was your 2 rookies, Pred and Sib, in their second match being on LAN versus the Atlanta FaZe. Sib is facing off against a team that he was a substitute for the last few seasons. And they post a 1.11 and a 1.18. The rookies combined go plus 24 versus the defending champs. And by the way, in their ring ceremony game, they literally just got their rings right before they headed on stage, and they beat them that way. Not only do they beat the Atlanta FaZe, but then they go on to beat another great looking roster and the New York Subliners. The Subliners have come out hot. They've been looking very, very strong. They dropped the opening hard point, I believe, on Bocage, but they win the search and destroy, and they go plus 41. And the last 2 respawns combined, and Mac once again having another stellar performance, puts up a 1.34 versus his prior team. So to me, the fact that the rookies looked that great that early, the fact that Mac was arguably one of the best players of the entirety of the event, and the fact that they looked as well-rounded as they did, makes me think that, yeah, I think they might be in that conversation. Again, I'm just raising the questions. I'm not answering the questions, but it definitely makes a solid case. And I feel like a lot of people would assume when a team like that comes in that they're going to be great at hardpoint. Actually, their worst game mode by definition was hardpoint, right? They go 4-3 in that. They go 3-1 in search and destroy, and they finished 3-1 in control, of which they went 11-3 in rounds and they only lost rounds in the finals to the Toronto Ultra, right? So it was just, I mean, it felt like this team on every level was checking, right? Like they were checking the boxes that you would have throughout the season. It's, are the rookies going to be as solid as we want off the rip? Is actually going to be able to put up good enough numbers? Is the X factor, if you will, in Mac going to be able to perform now back with an SMG in his hands? They answered all of those and in record time. So I feel like if you were to put a serious list of contenders on the page, I already think that they'd join that list, but I think at this, at stage 1, we will find out if they are true major contenders. Obviously with the stage 1 qualifier matches, but at the major itself. And not only will Seattle Surge, be tested as stage 1 progresses, or rather as the major progresses, but they will figure things out quite quickly. We will find out very, very fast what level that they're on. So it will be a very quick and early test. We will not necessarily have our for sure answer, but we will have a better understanding of where this Seattle Surge team ranks and if they can continue to be a solid major contender. And like I said, when I say major contender, I'm talking like top 3 teams in the game. It is realistically what I'm saying. Again, there are a lot of teams who can win a major this year, but are they going to be at the top of that list? Because again, we could talk about 5 or 6 teams that have a genuine shot, but to have a realistic shot is a different story. And we'll learn that quite early with Seattle Surge, and we'll see what they can do in those 2 difficult gauntlet first matches. The next thing to talk about is more of a somber one, right? LA Guerrillas. Are they already crumbling, right? And it can be easy to make assumptions given that we've only seen one series from quite a few teams. Obviously, the LA Guerrillas in contention for that. But the one match that we did see was not all that promising, right? The 3-1 loss to the Mutineers, who were not at all high ranked coming into this tournament. The Mutineers were ranked as a team that's basically the same roster as last year. In some ways, a lot of teams saying that they weren't granted hardpoint. The roles were not going to work out very well for this team. And we look at this series in total, and LAG got outslayed by a team by 46 kills. Like I said, lost a close opening hardpoint on that Bocage, but they go on to lose the search and destroy in Berlin. I think it was a Gavutu control. They were 1 round away from getting 3-0 swept in that. So we could be talking about a different story, right? Where LAG, they did fight back in the control, but 1 round goes differently, and this is a 3-0, 3-0, right? A 3-0 in the series and a 3-0 in the control, and we're thinking even worse things about the LA Guerrillas. But they did fight back, and then I believe they had a Berlin hardpoint that looked good off the first set of rotations, but just quickly started to crumble rotation by rotation on the second side. I went back and watched this particular map, and if you yourself do go back and watch it, you'll see second set of rotations on Berlin, P2, P3, and P4. LAG are there off the rotation, and they get broken every single time, right? And those are 3 hills in a row that are great hills. I mean, you can hold time at Library, you can hold great time at Fire, and the same thing can be said for Train. And you cannot allow for a team to cycle P3 and P4 back to back, and they did that versus the Mutineers team that, again, had a lot of questions coming in to this tournament. And Florida eventually would go on a 147-60 run to ultimately close out the series. And again, when we talk about the LA Guerrillas, there's a big talking point around. There's a lot of voices on this team. You got players with big personalities. It could be a very tense environment given, like I said, how important a season it is for these players, how important it is for the organization to try to turn around their perspective or maybe their outlook by a lot of other players as well. And like I said, with a lot of teams making a jump and with the current level of competition, the dramatic focus on teamwork, it makes you wonder what teams will fall by the wayside. Like I said, this is already going to be a testing period for the Guerrillas. And I think it's fair to say these early matches are going to be very important for them. I mean, these are going to be very important matches already for LAG. Again, given the story around this roster, which is, again, that they will crumble, that they will make mistakes, that they have some big voices. It's just a matter of time. This team is a ticking time bomb, right? So to me, this first qualifier schedule, these early matches are going to be big for them. And they have the Boston Breach to kick things off, which I feel like Boston's only getting better. Then they have the New York Subliners, who, again, are a team that was not very well practiced coming into kickoff. And they looked pretty solid. I think all in all, they beat some teams that people were surprised about. And then they had the team that won the entirety of the event and the Toronto Ultra. if they lose versus Boston, it's very fair to say or to expect that the LA Guerrillas could start off 0-3. Considering all the things that we talked about, what's going to happen for LAG? Because I feel like in these first three, it is going to be a put up or shut up type of moment where if they don't come out of the gates hot, there's going to be a lot of questions already thrown around. There's going to be a lot of things already discussed on if this team can survive, even with the level of talent that they have on this roster. So a big proving period already for LAG. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got the Toronto Ultra. Are they the true number one team in the game? I mean, realistically, is this team truly the best team right now in the CDL? And again, after Kickoff Classic, I feel like you have to say yes, but we will find out that at the Stage 1 qualifier, at the Stage 1 major. We will find out whether or not this team truly is the best in the game. And whenever you look at where everybody had Ultra coming into this tournament, it's kind of funny looking back because most people had them in top 3 or top 4, but simply just out of respect, because nobody actually knew how this team was going to perform. Very similar to the New York Subliners. This team didn't have much practice and didn't have much top practice versus solid squads either. For those that don't know, Toronto Ultra, they went home to Europe, right? And they, for the most part, were playing EU challenger teams for like 80 or 90% of their practice before they came back to the States for the Kickoff Classic. I believe that they were expecting themselves to play well, but not win the entire thing. That's just my personal opinion. So the fact that they come in and they beat the Florida Mutineers the way that they did, they dominate the respawns. That was the series where Kleenex had 186 engagements, 40 more engagements than the next highest player on the team. He also posts a 1.14 KD. They come into their next series versus a great looking LA Thieves team. They rebound after a blowout loss on the opening Bocage. And they made an unreal comeback on that Tuscan hardpoint. Again, something that I feel like needs to be looked at and they forced the game 5 and they win it obviously in that Bocage search and destroy. But just in general, right? When you look at that, all the aspects of this Toronto Ultra team, and for them to come out the way that they did, and probably from their perspective to not even be as good as they will be throughout the rest of the season, it makes it scary, because maybe this Ultra team has only gotten even better after what was an unexpected phenomenal season in Cold War. And I feel like you saw a number of different things that made you happy if you're a Toronto fan. One of the biggest things for me, which again we just discussed it, was that Tuscan hardpoint comeback they were able to make. They were down 222 to 158, and they make the comeback to force the game 5. The coordination at the end of that play was unbelievable. I mean, to me, that was probably the most impressive play of the weekend from a team aspect of things. The fact that Insight, I believe it was on P1. Insight jumps to the tree. He finds the opening pick. They rely on him to find that opening pick, and then the rest of the team jump to their side. The coordination, the awareness of what everybody else is doing on that side of the map, and then after winning the engagements, of which it comes down to a 1v1, Cammy wins that, and then I know a lot of people were like, well, why is Cammy not getting in the hill? His awareness to, you know what, I'm going to push out field to try and change spawns. I'm also going to try to push out field to catch out early players, because he's already aware of the fact that his team is going to be able to cycle in the hill right after him. The last thing that LA Thieves are thinking is that somebody's going to jump outside of the hill. So like I said, there was just so many little things. This team, just from a chemistry standpoint, from an in-game standpoint, from just what it means to be a team, it's terrifying that they looked as good as they did with arguably not great practice coming in. And I know we talk about teamwork a lot, but one of the biggest talking points, or one of the most primary subjects about this Toronto Ultra team, is how great Kleenex looked. I mean, he took a big leap at the Kickoff Classic. He had the number 6 overall KD at this event. And if you were to take out the players who only played one series, he's actually sits at number 2. So I feel like when you actually average who had the highest level of competition, the fact that Kleenex played 3 series, which is higher than the player who would sit at number 2 in that situation, or the 5 players above him, the fact that he was able to honestly have probably the best event out of anybody, and also be the fastest pushed up player, one of the fastest players that we have in the CDL, That is unbelievably impressive, right? That is something to really be excited about if you're an Ultra fan. Like I said, he finishes off with a 1.13 KD throughout this entire event. He had the number 1 KD in control at a 1.48. He was the number 6 player in kills per minute and hardpoint at 28. And then he also just posted a nice little 1.22 KD in search and destroy. So again, just a wonderful stat line from Kleenex. His ability to really step up at this event was impressive. And then to think that Bance had a great event. I think all players were above a 1, which is what you'd expect. But the fact that it was really Insight and Cammy who were the primary talking points last year, and if you expect for them to reach that same level that they did last year, which I fully expect that, and then along with the SMGs who had a great event, Kleenex specifically, we very well could already know who our number 1 team in the game is going to be coming into the Major 1 qualifiers. But on the same topic of that, they're going to be tested, right? They will be tested early on in those qualifiers for stage 1, especially in their first game of the season. Like I mentioned earlier, it will be a finals rematch versus the Seattle Surge. Again, if you're the Surge, you learned a lot from that series. If you're Toronto, I'm sure that they are working heavily to prepare for that matchup. After the Seattle Surge, they'll then have the Los Angeles Guerrillas. After that, they'll have the Florida Mutineers, a team that they've already played. Then they'll face off against OpTic Texas, who we expect to be a much better form of themselves. And then the LA Thieves, who also had a great tournament at the Kickoff Classic. So we'll find out whether or not they are the true number 1 team. I think the Kickoff really changed a lot of people's opinions on who really sits at the top. And like I said, the Toronto Ultra, they've got themselves a pretty tough schedule. They're going to be playing against 3 teams that they beat. And those 3 teams learned a lot from that Kickoff Classic. They have full access to VOD on how Toronto Ultra was able to best them and maybe how to approach things. So I think that discussion of if Toronto, are they truly the number 1 team in the game? We will find that out and find that out quite early on. But still a very fun story to be looking out for, specifically on Kleenex. And maybe he could be the player that becomes the number 1 option for Ultra moving forward. All right. Our final story coming into Major 1 it's got to be OpTic Texas. And I feel like the headline for them is that, is there anything to worry about? Like, is that Kickoff Classic loss that they have to the LA Thieves something to be concerned about? Or rather, what should be the concern level for OpTic Texas? And to me, this was the biggest surprise of the entire Kickoff Classic. And people could say, what are you talking about? Atlanta FaZe, them losing the way that they did, that was a shock. I was surprised by that. I was. But as somebody who watched a decent amount of scrimmages coming into the Kickoff Classic, even ones that weren't streamed, I expected Seattle Surge to be a great roster. I mean, all of us as talent were like, okay, this guy Pred is nasty. Like, you could instantly tell the way that he was playing, his incredible decision making. It was very, very impressive. So I felt like that was already going to be a difficult matchup for the Atlanta FaZe. So I wasn't ultimately like caught off guard by that. I was more caught off guard by OpTic Texas, because everybody that I talked to, whether it was managers, whether it was coaches, whatever, they were telling me that the most complete team right now, it appears, actually isn't Atlanta. It's OpTic Texas. I was more surprised about that because I was being told that they are the most complete team coming into the Kickoff Classic, and versus LA Thieves, who, at least by a lot of people, were talking about how LA Thieves did not look great in off-season scrimmages, or rather I should say in preseason scrimmages. The team's really struggling in a few different areas, and to me, hearing that was like, oh, it has to be the SMGs, right? Because of course you're not going to expect for Octane and Kenny to play bad. I thought it was probably a majority of Draza and Envoy trying to figure out their pacing with each other. So to me, this was the biggest surprise of the entire Kickoff Classic was OpTic Texas not getting through their very first round match. And then also it was a big series, right, for OpTic Texas, given the fact that this is 2 organizations, the 2 most legendary franchises, or organizations I should say, in Call of Duty history, merging into one franchise with the Envy and OpTic merger. It's a new roster facing off against Envoy in a grudge match. The crowd was on their side, and it's also in their home venue at the Esports Stadium. I have never heard fans get more excited than when OpTic did walk on the stage. And like I said, it wasn't even when they were competing. It wasn't even as if like someone made a great play in a match. They were the loudest whenever OpTic just simply walked up on stage. It was crazy. And And it's no surprise, right, that in that match, I know Scump has already talked about it, how he felt a little bit nervous. He felt just uncomfortable in that game. Starts off, not great in the first 2 maps specifically. Ends out with like a 0.83 KD overall. The vetoes did not set themselves up for success. For anybody who'd watched LA Thieves, for anybody who looked up the numbers around LA Thieves in regards to what they like to play, the maps that they have been solid on are the big maps. And what do? They come out and they play LA Thieves on what looks to be their undisputed best map in Hardpoint, Gavutu. I think for OpTic Texas, that there is real potential right now for a team to maximize on the current landscape with top rosters that we have in the CDL in terms of strengths and weaknesses. And weaknesses. And what do I mean by that? If you look at Toronto and FaZe, 2 top dogs from last year, what did they both pride themselves on? Search, destroy, and control. Now, again, I know that Atlanta had the best record in that mode last year, right, in regards to Hardpoint. But if you talk to Atlanta, Hardpoint is where they felt the most vulnerable, right? That's where they felt like that could be the way that they get taken down, is through the hardpoints. And oftentimes when they would lose, it was through hardpoints, right? All throughout Modern Warfare. The big talking point around Atlanta FaZe, the biggest issue that they have is the rotations. It is the fact that they want to break every single hill. And the same thing can be said for Toronto. When Toronto was often winning, it was because their hardpoint was upgraded. It stepped up alongside the fact that they were the number 2 team in Search and Destroy, the fact that they were a top 3 team in Control. When hardpoint raised, that's whenever they saw the most success. And so I think that the way that OpTic can become contenders and get rid of the notion, right, that is this a worrying sign, right? Is this going to be another year of where OpTic cannot necessarily get to the peak, cannot get to a grand final, much like they did last year? I think the way that OpTic can truly become the best form of themselves, and I mean true contenders this year, is by becoming dominant in hardpoint, which is not easy with squad spawns, not easy with the current landscape of teams. But if they can become one of the best hardpoint teams in the game, and also by becoming a more methodical team, the way that Atlanta won last year, Simp said it. He said, I feel like we were the most prepared team in the entire game. And you could argue that that team didn't necessarily have to be all that prepared because they slayed better than anybody, right? So the fact that they were the most prepared team just goes to show the importance of the methodical side of it, along with pairing it into slaying. What did the Ultra just do to win the Kickoff Classic? Great slaying, along with already above average, if not some of the best in the league, teamwork and chemistry. That is what got them through the gauntlet maps, right? They don't make it to the grand finals if they don't have that crazy coordinated push in that Tuscan hardpoint versus the LA Thieves. It's a totally different conversation about the Toronto Ultra. It is LA Thieves versus Surge in the finals. We're talking about LA Thieves in this video. We're probably not talking about the Toronto Ultra. But the fact that they did that, the fact that they were able to go to a game 5, clutch it up there, and then go into that grand finals, and then dominate the Surge in that final Berlin, it's impeccable. And I feel like OpTic do have a lane to follow that, but to also pick up on the weaknesses that already exist in some of the top teams right now. But like I said, a big part of that is going to come from the methodical side, from the strategy side, right? The way that Dallas Empire were able to take down Atlanta FaZe last season, a team that was better at slaying than them for the most part, right? Like I said, back in MW in that champs grand final. Did you see the strategies that they pulled out? Right? Did you see the little things that they were able to do? The strategies that they had worked on throughout the entirety of the season for that very match? That's the thing, right? That is what's going to, me at least, get them to be a top caliber roster in the game, and to get this conversation, or to get this this story kind of out of their court, is to really improve in the methodical side of things. And I can't lie, it wasn't a great first showing, right? It was not the most promising, given the fact that this team was so highly rated coming into the Kickoff Classic. But overall, I think it could be a great thing for them. I really do. I think it could be a great thing for them. You've already seen them making adjustments, or talk about in Search and Destroy how they're going to be switching up who's going to be running the sniper from now on. They've addressed the mistakes they made in some of the hard points, and some of the controls, etc. So I feel like the best part for OpTic as well is that they also have a great schedule for the Major 1 qualifier, and that as well will instantly show us if there is something to truly worry about for OpTic Texas coming into stage 1. It's instantly going to be aware because their very first 3 matches are great. I mean, when you look at the team that didn't have a great performance at the kickoff, this is a great chance for them to rebound. It is a great chance for this team to really develop strategies, to really kind of fine tune what it is that they want to do. Because they're going to be facing off against the London Royal Ravens. That team got 3-0'd at the kickoff. Then they play against the Minnesota Rocker. That team got 3-0'd. Then they face off against Paris Legion. That team got 3-1'd. Then they face off against Toronto, which is going to be without a doubt their most difficult matchup at the stage, or at the Major 1 qualifier. And then to close it out, they face off against the Boston Breach, a team who's going to be a good competitor for them, but ultimately, right now at least, you would assume that OpTic Texas will be the favorites coming into that match versus the Boston Breach. So again, you're playing 2 teams that got 3-0 to kickoff, then you play Paris to warm up for Ultra and Breach and to fine-tune the strategies to work out what exactly the kinks are right now in the overall gameplay. And I feel like it could be a great opportunity for them to start off that major hot and to really catch some momentum. But I will say, while I should say that is a great schedule for them to start off, if they don't go 3-0 to start off the year, that's when this question gets brought up again, right? If they don't start off 3-0, if they don't have a 4-1 record, that could be where this question really comes into fruition. But I feel like from a record standpoint, from basically every other team schedule coming into Major 1 qualifiers, I feel like they have, without a doubt, one of the better ones, if not the best one, because you have the chance to really catch some momentum and to work on the issues that you had at the kickoff and to really fine tune things before you face off against Ultra, before you face off against Breach, and before you head in to that first major, which is also going to be on home soil. So that is going to be our top 5 stories coming into Major 1 qualifiers, coming into Major 1. I know it was a little bit long-winded, probably longer than I expected it to be, but again, it's the beginning of the season. There's a lot of things to talk about. To me, kickoff was so much fun to watch. It was so much fun to be a part of. I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. And I think we have some great stories. Again, there are so many other things that we could talk about coming into Major 1, but I feel like these are the most important subjects to discuss. Atlanta FaZe could they be weakening? Could teams be catching up to them? Seattle Surge, do we have another major contender? Are they going to push some teams right out of that top level conversation where maybe they join the top 3 and another roster starts to fall? From the LA Guerrillas side, are they already crumbling? Have we already seen this team's weakness? Toronto Ultra, are they the true number 1 team in the game? Will they continue to show us that they have even better ways? Or could they show us that we've not even seen the best of them when it came down to the Kickoff Classic? And then finally for OpTic Texas, was that loss versus LA Thieves something to worry about? Should we be worried about OpTic coming in to stage 1, and could they instantly turn things around, as they will have a good schedule, but you don't want to lose versus any of those early teams, as that is going to be big for the qualification side of things at that major. So like I said, I had a great time making this. I hope you guys did as well. Expect some more LandO's Logic videos to come out throughout the entirety of the year, and also be on the lookout for LandO's Lock-ins. We're going to be breaking down all of our pick'ems. Had an okay bracket. I feel like when it comes down to the Kickoff Classic, you have no idea how those matches are going to go. So the fact that we did escape with a few points, I'm still pretty proud about. But make sure to stay tuned for that. If you have not done so already, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to like this video and share it on some social media if you'd like. And also, you can click the bell. I've heard that's a pretty good thing to do as well. But I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Thanks so much for watching LandO's Logic, and I'll see you in a few days for LandO's Lock-ins. Have a great day, and it's about to be a phenomenal time at the Stage 1 qualifier.